conflict.
Yep.
We've had strengthening the Bandung principles around the emerging challenges in the world. So I'm paraphrasing, but ideally the concerns that NAM has dealt with are concerns that affect women.
Yes.
And not just affecting them, but women are part and parcel of those concerns.
Yes.
If you talk about disarmament, which was one of the first core reasons why NAM was established, they are either victims of disarmament, but in some cases there have been fighters on the side of disarmament. So any mission around disarmament requires them to be part and parcel. If you're talking about the current concerns now, Palestine, other conflicts in the world, the whole issue of violating territorial integrity, but also things like trade. I think what Uganda has presented today is how do we mobilize financing for development, issues of taxation and debt burden. And as long as we remain on our individual, acting as individual countries in the global south, we shall not overcome the issue of the debt burden. An increased debt burden leads to deindustrialization, definancing of social services, and you cannot have development.
Something small, Professor.
Yes,
so the women are right.
Yes.
Their agenda is handled in a general form.
It is actually handled on the sidelines, but it is handled 2 years later. So I imagine.
Why do you think it has taken that long since the 1950s when the NAM was formed, that up to now the women are still demanding to have their issues served on the very table?
I don't know why it has taken so long, but interestingly, when you talk to these leaders, they all appreciate the importance of women. Like if you read what the president of Azerbaijan presented in 2023 at the Advancing Women's Rights and Empowerment Agenda conference of the NAM, 2 years later after the main NAM, he talked about how women have been central to development, to everything that Azerbaijan and the world has had. But I think the concern is seeing it as peripheral. It's like for some general tendencies, you have these as global challenges, debt burden, war, limited investment, sustainable development.
Cooperation.
Yeah, deepening collaboration and cooperation, but failing to see that women are actually central to those processes. Because in many countries, women are at the core of the labor force, even if it is informalized. They're at the labor of these conflicts. They are managing households. So if you have your women not invested in, disempowered, you will actually not achieve empowerment.
I'm looking at two things.
Yes, please.
I'll look at empowerment later. Why do women feel that they're sidelined, even when actually it would look obvious that whatever is discussed concern them 100%?
No, but
if you have the concern about Israel and Palestine, the concern about women and children has been, actually, it overtook every other thing.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
wherever there is war, the concern about women and children are being killed, women and children, it is always them. So if people are discussing that economic affluence and things like that, what is that women feel is not touched in as far as they're concerned?
The issue is beyond the rhetoric. You don't get much investment in working in that. It is true that because we are into the PR of the war in Palestine, every war, or in any war, people will highlight how women and children are suffering, as of showing actually the other person is a worse aggressor. Okay. But after the war, you don't get much investment in empowering women. You actually get women being returned to tradition, to remind them whether you fought or you suffered, your place is here as determined by culture and religion. If you come to the sideline conference that was happening yesterday in Uganda here, the one on agro business.
In Chigo.
Yes, in Chigo. You are talking about women's enterprises not being invested in. You're talking about lack of value addition. So even when they get together as groups to do something small, because there is no industry to add value and to preserve, they are forced to sell. Immediately they harvest. So they get low costs, low prices, vis-a-vis what they actually invested in. So while we acknowledge that as part of the Kampala Declaration, let's say at the end of the NAM, it's part of the Kampala Declaration, unless you follow it up with putting in place infrastructure to industrialize this country, including to industrialize women's enterprises, for value addition, you'll be at the same stage 5 years from now. You'll be at the same stage 10 years from now. What did our president present at Baku in 2023? I'm not our president, our minister of gender then. She was talking about things like child marriage. She was talking about limited access to education, limited access to power. Of course, now we have 45% women in representation. You're talking about slavery for women, and we've seen how many females have to go, for example, to the Middle East and work in circumstances sometimes which have been reported not be very humane.
True.
And why are they doing that? Because they have nothing else to do, okay? So as long as we keep talking big things, big investment, without paying attention to minority groups like women, the concerns will always remain. And that's why the Women's League or Women's Lobby feels probably if we brought these concerns into the plenary, into the mainstream, probably the pronouncements and the action thereafter will be stronger.
I wanted to ask you, when we talk of empowerment of women,
Yes.
what exactly would this notion entail in somebody is to understand it well? We say it at all levels, village, Uganda, now NAM. When we talk of empowerment of women,
Yes.
I want whoever is watching to understand, what exactly does it contain, or would it contain?
Okay. I think one, you're mainly talking of where are they coming from? Women are coming from a place of double marginalization. First of all, these countries are marginalized by being ex-colonized countries.
Yes.
They arrive in the world as peripheral to the global economic order, where other people determine what they should produce, what they should export, at what price they should produce and export, what rules they should have, what culture they should promote. So these ex-colonies come on the global agenda as peripheral countries, spaces of natural resource extraction, but not spaces of investment into the human capital. Okay? So you have that. That's the first stage of marginalization. And then within that, you also find another level of marginalization of women within that. So that is where the concern is.
Breaking the two chains.
Yes, so there are two chains. I mean, if we had time, we could even add a third chain of being ex-colonized, post-colonial, being female, and also being black, okay? So all these things come with that. Then maybe if you're talking about a person who is in a very rural area, you could even talk about a fourth chain. And, I mean, even in a country like that, there's a lot of investment around Kampala, however little it is, and there's very little investment in rural areas. So there are all these levels of marginalization. And that's why these days you cannot just talk about women male marginalization. We talk about intersectionality. How are you marginalized by your location on the different spheres of privilege and disadvantage? So now, let's come now to the general thing of women within the NAM. The general way it's discussed is in terms of the double or dual marginalization. One, by the countries being peripheral and suffering within an equal global economic order. But again, within that, agenda dichotomies emerging from negative or regressive gender norms, regressive religious norms, then things like biological disadvantages, that a girl will drop out earlier if she engages in unprotected sex. Vis-a-vis a male, she will drop out of school earlier. So that affects now the three accesses: access to labor, access the labor market in terms of jobs, access to education, then also access to power. Because if you're not educated, you cannot get a job, then you don't have much bargaining power. Whether you're talking about your reproductive rights, whether you're talking about in the household, whether you're talking about the community. And so these things, these rallying cries will continue until these things are addressed. But we also have to recognize that, as the minister presented yesterday in his opening remarks, Honorable J.J. Odong, that actually there are always emerging challenges. And each emerging challenge brings with it all these different dichotomies, okay? If today we were disagreeing, maybe because of levels of education, tomorrow if you bring something like neoliberalism, which leads to massive retrenchment, you then even have males coming to female spaces, and that leads to women's further marginalization. And that's why he was talking yesterday of deepening our collaboration and cooperation to face emerging challenges.
How can the women leagues and movements win this agitation to get to the desk, to the discussion table inside NAM? And how practical can NAM handle now women issues if they get to make their way inside, let's say, the convention room in Munyonyo?
One, I don't know how the program has been organized in the plenary. Maybe, and some of these things are set because of diplomatic things, they are set way in advance.
No, I'm looking at in the ideal form, be it in Munyonyo or wherever.
For the future conferences.
Exactly.
I think, one, the leaders have always acknowledged the role of women. The issue is accepting. So the clamoring or the rallying and the advocacy by the women's lobby is to say, can we be mainstream? Not just to be, and they're trying to say, these are core, so they should not actually just be the concern of women. They should be the concern of everyone in NAM.
In fact, they want to be part of the decision-making organs of NAM.
Yes, but decision-making organ of NAM is just one thing, okay? But beyond there, can we see investment? Can we see people in, okay, let's say now you're not going to change the profile of the presidents that occupy the NAM top organ, okay? Because that's how they arise. But even if women are not there, can we see dividends for investment in areas where women consider themselves prime? And indeed, these countries do try, but when it comes to implementation, they fall victim to the negative gender norms, unequal gender norms, and things like that. Look at like gender policies in this country. They are very top-notch. Look at we're a country who, before you pass any policy, you tick the box of the SDG number 5, NDP is very gender compliant, PDM is very gender compliant, but the practice is different. Because I think those who frame the policies and those who implement the policies have a different understanding of these things. And part of the reason they have a different understanding of these things is there's a limited national cake to share. Okay. So if from these big billions that the country, at the national level, what is going down is 1 million per household, then those who implement that at lower level are going to use the definition of who is a household head. And if traditionally household head is a male, they will get over the female household heads, who are seen as a sort of defective of household headship.
So you also doubt the possibility of now the leagues really convincing the male-dominated kind of blocks?
You see, you're only looking at one thing of the leadership. But actually within NAM, there's a lot of participation that women can take advantage of.
And those the branches they look at as peripheral?
Yes, because it looks like what comes from the side events does not make its way to the mainstream. So if for starters, what do we have? We have the side events. So can we use those? And can that then make its way into the plenary session? That's why I'm saying that I'm very interested in seeing what the Kampala Declaration after NAM will come up with. So and by the way, there are very many activities. You have the women agribusiness. You're going to have the first ladies. I think is going to happen like on Thursday. So the different first ladies of the NAM countries, they're also going to come up with their issues. Tomorrow, I think there's something around entrepreneurship. Again, it's women focused. Then you're also going to have something around, which is organized by UNDP, again, around the women issues in the countries that UNDP is operating in within NAM. So there's a lot of opportunity. And these matters are being raised. But can we see them making their way into the mainstream document? But the issue is, if you have the main NAM running and the women-focused NAM conference running 2 years later, then they keep running like they are different documents, and harmonization becomes a challenge. I think now that's why the women are saying, can it be part of the plenary?
Doesn't the situation of women in the different member states explain what must be the outcome or the general picture of NAM?
The situation of women?
Yes, in the different member states. Couldn't it be the explanation of how it ends up in the bloc?
Not really. It's like saying, how do the different countries end up in the NAM? Because every country is unique and every country is peculiar. And the peculiarity is not only on gender. The peculiarity is on many things in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of different practices. But you see, they have found a way of collaborating. And one of the pillars of NAM is mutual respect. So regardless of your cultural divergences, there's mutual respect. So what can you take? Some countries are Christian, some countries are Hindu, some countries are Muslim, for example. So some countries have different levels of how they do their political organization, whether it's democracy or not democracy, but there's that mutual respect. There's that territorial integrity. There's the thing of feeling that there should be self-determination.
Everybody is harbored the way they are.
Everybody is harbored, and that's why, in a way, you do get, and for a long time there have been a number of similarities between the NAM and the women's movement, because it brought them together against articulating issues of commonality, whether women's movement or the non-aligned movement, against Western imperialism, which actually was disadvantaged. It's like I said, there's double, marginalization. If Uganda is saddled with a big debt burden, if Uganda is put under the structural adjustment program where you're told, do not invest in your people, cut down on public expenditure, and Uganda ends up defunding education and defunding health and whatever else social services they are. So you are in a way putting that country behind, because the most vulnerable of that country, who may be the majority, like women, like the youth, like the rural people, will end up not being invested in. And then those actually become a problem for the country. So these things move together. And what all these two movements have always identified, they have always identified Western imperialism as the problem, because of the way they are integrated within the global economic order. So what you see NAM doing and becoming stronger, and they started as a group of 5, they are now 120. The delegates who are in these countries are in their hundreds. So people are buying into this kind of thinking, but beyond even NAM, there's the whole thinking of self-determination. Who should determine how a country does its thing, what a country prioritizes. On the African continent, you're seeing the rise in Pan-Africanism. Yes. In the Arabian world, you see Pan-Arabism, Arab-Asian relationships, Africa. So there are many other things coming up as a way of articulating this self-determination. So there are many things coming up, and they are in a way tied together. So it's not just the women and the divergences within women's groups. There's also the divergences within the countries, but what brings them together is how they are unequally saddled within the global economic order.
Do we have some international blocks where women are really enjoying space like we see it is being demanded in NAM?
I don't know what you mean by what's demanded in NAM. I don't think women are seeking to overthrow their president.
But they would love to have a vibrant...
What they are saying, yes. Can women's issues be mainstreamed within NAM?
Okay.
For example,
yes.
Can we have a theme on NAM, just focusing on women? I know the NAM women conferences...
An international block where we have had that?
Yes, UNIFEM does that. The CSW does that, okay, where they just focus on women, okay. These are UN things which run around that. But we are saying, what the women are saying is, even if you just, and I've told you that NAM does hold women-focused conferences 2 years later, but they're saying these things we are seeing 2 years later are core to what actually NAM is articulating for. NAM is articulating for development, sustainable development. That is very much a women concern, because the citizens of those countries, you cannot say when a thing is affecting men and then affecting women. If there is war here, it affects us in equal measure. So when you discuss it, you have to pay attention to how it affects the different people. And for you to do that, you have to be aware of how it affects these people differently and be intentional at addressing it like that.
What would be your message to leaders in NAM in this very, very line of what we're discussing as we wind up?
Yes, my message to the leaders, please mainstream the gender issue within NAM, because as Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi said, the fight for women's rights is part and parcel of NAM. The two movements move together. The women's movement and the non-aligned movement, they are all fighting for the same cause against Western imperialism and what Western and neocolonialism, and what those stand for. Okay. They stand for defunding of development in developing countries. They stand for underdevelopment of the countries, and actually not investing in the people of those countries. So can we mainstream gender in that. And why is it important to mainstream gender? Because one movement which for a long time has paid attention to matters of exclusion, how exclusion manifests, and the intersectionality of that. You can't get any other better movement that articulates that very well.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Her name is Professor Sarah Sani. She comes from the School of Women and Gender Studies, College of Humanities and Social Sciences at the mighty Makerere University.
Thank you.
Michael Jordan Lokomwa. Rhoda Ngozi has to give us more news. Enjoy the night. Don't miss the news. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
The energy of this land was born in the